Hey everyone, welcome to Can't Afford to Record, the YouTube channel where we figure out the art of audio production together. Today I'm catching up with a good friend of mine, Ryan Roxy. Being a guitar player for Alice Cooper, as you can imagine, Ryan does a lot of interviews talking about that and talking about that experience, what it's like to be on the road with Alice. But in this interview, we're really going to be diving into some of these Alice Cooper albums he's appeared on, as well as many other albums and studio experiences throughout his career. Ryan has worked with many incredible producers, including Bob Ezrin, Bob Rock, and Tony Visconti. And honestly, if any of us were to work with just one of those producers, that would be a career highlight, let alone all of those producers and many more. There are some really cool stories in this interview, some that I've never heard before. So Ryan, thank you so much for coming on. It was a pleasure to have you. And for those about to watch, enjoy the interview and enjoy a more recording studio focused interview with Ryan Roxy. Here we are, Ryan Roxy. Thank you for coming on the podcast. Great to have you here. I was thinking like how I wanted to go about this interview, and I just realized we're just going to hang out. And I'm just going to send some cool questions your way because we've known each other for a while now. So thanks for being here.
There is no need for the fanfare. We know each other very well at this point. We've toured together. We've definitely recorded together a lot. And we've kind of grown up together. I've known you since you were a child.
Yeah, since I was 10 years old, and I went to my first Alice Cooper concert, which was at Wembley Arena, and Ronnie James Dio opened, so I can say that I saw Dio, and Brian May came out for School's Out.
That was that show, huh?
Yeah,
Oh,
that was the one.
that was one of those top 5 rock moments. I didn't realize that that was your first show as well. Yeah, Ronnie James Dio putting us to the test every single night because his voice in his band, everything about Ronnie James Dio was kicking ass in that era, and he would go on right before us. So how it pushed us to be as entertaining and good as possible. And then what can we do to outshine Ronnie James Dio? Well, let's just invite, Brian May up on stage, and that seemed to do the trick, at least for one show.
Yeah.
But Brian May was just, to jam with him, what a thrill. It's his one Vox AC30 was louder than my entire 3 stacks that I had at that time. I think I was playing a hybrid of Marshall and Sun amplifiers with Fender cabinets, and I had like 6 of them all turned on. Nothing compared to his one little AC30.
That's amazing. Yeah, he found it and he kept it, and and he still plays it. It's just that sound, isn't it? Okay, well look, we're this is going to be a slightly different catch-up interview conversation, I think, to what you generally do, because this is such an audio production, recording, mixing based channel.
And you know me, I'm so into the dials and the knobs, and I'm just such a
I
somewhere
feel like
around
you are
2K.
more and more and more. You are actually, so since we've been working together lately, you really are.
Here's the exact way I feel about production. I don't know the frequency, but I know when it sounds like a kick-ass guitar tone. Does that make sense? It's like I don't know how to dial it up exactly with the parametric and all that stuff. And you put it through this EQ and you put it through that compressor. I just know when we get there, or when I listen back to a mix and I hear that it needs just a little bit of this, I can explain it to you in such a way that you'll dial up that exact tone. So, I look, at this point, I'm one of the last of the old schooler Mohicans that still knows how to dial up an amp. I can dial up a live sound for an amp. It's always good if you know your amp that you like playing out of. But what you do on the board is a whole nother world that I'm very proud of you for learning it and then being able to use it for the music that we're creating right now.
Well, thank you, man. But I mean, I kind of wanted to I've got a bunch of questions. I've gone through. I've learned actually. I did some studying, and I got some found out some new things about these albums that you've been on, and
Okay.
but I want to start actually kind of recently with you because while we've got recording studios that have spent thousands and thousands of dollars on Pro Tools and all of this and all of that, you unapologetically use GarageBand
Yeah. Yeah.
and you love
Well,
it.
look, I sort of love garage bands. You know,
Yeah,
like all my favorite albums have a sort of indie garagey type of feel. There's a few albums that have super slick production that I love as well. But, the first Cheap Trick record, for instance, one of my favorite albums of all time, that has that sort of just kind of they recorded it in the room. And I love that garage feel. It's the way that the whole idea and the whole concept behind the Alice Cooper album, The Eyes of Alice Cooper, was to take a garage band sort of approach. And I'll be honest with you, I dipped my toe into Pro Tools way back in the day. I moved to Europe, tried to grasp my head around Logic, with a Pro Tools front, but Logic hard, it was all these things. And I kept going back to my Mac laptop and getting all the ideas down on that little built-in program, GarageBand. And now I'm fine with it because what I record in this studio, I send to you, and it's easy. It's like a file's a file. If you record a good quality file, it doesn't matter what you record it on. And I know that
right,
you are very attached to your platform that you're recording with these days. So,
right. And that's like a thing that sort of ends up getting said a lot is the best DAW is the one you're most comfortable with. That's
yes,
that's
yes.
that's that's the answer. But I think for a lot of people, they think, oh, if I'm not spending money on a piece of software, if I'm not, you know, if I'm not upgrading to this or that, then I'm not really doing it properly, which is totally false. And you're very comfortable in like, I'm going to use GarageBand because that's the easiest way for me to write my songs on. It's a little bit like when people buy guitars. It's like, well, if I don't spend $3,000 on this
Yeah.
guitar, then I'm not going to be able to play it well. When it's like, you can play anything on any guitar, really, you know?
The best guitar you'll ever own and play is the one that makes you want to play just a little bit more. And that's the
Exactly.
way I feel. The best, you know, digital what was it? Digital audio workshop? Is that what it is? Or
Workspace, yeah, yeah,
workspace?
DAW,
Yeah.
yeah.
DAW.
DAW.
Those acronyms, man. It started with MIDI. I always hated like I never I'm 59 and I still don't understand what MIDI stands for. Do you know what that acronym is?
No idea.
There you go.
No idea.
Somewhere there's like 100 keyboard players right now going, "You friggin' idiot. What the hell?"
Just
I
ripping
don't
their
know what
computers
MIDI is.
apart.
Sacrilegious. No, but anyway, my the best DAW you can get is the one that is the easiest for you to operate so you can get your idea that's going to go away pretty soon, if you don't get it on tape or some sort of recording device soon. That's why, my second best after GarageBand is voice memos
Yeah.
on my iPhone. So if I got my go-to is voice memos iPhone. That's where the idea just gets from the head onto it. And then once I work out a couple versions of it, then it goes on to GarageBand. And then we move on to, you know, bigger platforms and bigger, uh, you know, we can always go back. I can record one part, one guitar. I think we've done that with a couple songs that I've recorded lately. I will listen to the mix that you come up with and I'll go, maybe I do need to lay some more background vocals. And then
Hmm.
you'll put it on, you'll get my files and then you'll just lay them on there. And then we'll have another, round of mixing, and that's what I love about the collaboration that we're doing right now.
Yeah, and and for those who might not know, that's Ryan explained it great there. Is that we're working on some songs together, and you record them on your end, you send them to me. I might record a few guitars or a few ideas, and we start putting a mix together. And we are really making these songs completely remotely. Ryan's in South Africa, I'm here in Canada, and this was one of my questions today, but I think it makes sense to bring it up now. Did you ever think when you were recording, maybe at Slash's studio in Hawaii, did you ever think one day we're going to be able to record on two laptops across the world? We're going to be able to make an album. Was there ever a moment where when that came up, or you could have been convinced that
Um,
that was going to happen?
yeah, I mean, as a little kid, that's what I dreamed about, is just
Mm,
recording some sort of music on my little tape deck and having it go out to the rest of the world. And you can actually do that now. As far as recording studio type stuff, Slash never had a studio in Hawaii. It was Bob Rock on the Tal Bachman album, but Slash had his studio called Slash's Snakepit in Hollywood.
got you.
Both great studios, and at that time they still couldn't record together, but now, unless there was a lot of math involved. I mean, when I first moved to Los Angeles, I remember there being some remote recording sessions because I worked at a place called Cherokee Studios, and I did the night shift. But in order for them to do a remote session, was involved like trucks, and involved like T1 lines, and involved this like all this heavy machinery. They would do it, but it's not like it is today where we could basically be having a session right now
Hmm.
in real time. So we got to be thankful for the technology, but you can't get, like anything else, you can't get too much into the technology, or you just get lost, and then the song suffers at the end of the
Hmm.
day.
Hmm. Yeah. So I've got here that that first Electric Angels album that came out in 1990, that was
Yes.
produced by Tony Visconti.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Great
I mean,
producer.
that's an incredible name. Was
Yeah.
that
For those of you that don't know, Tony Visconti did all of the T-Rex albums, all of the Mark Bolan recording. He worked on Young American, the Bowie albums. He was worked on a band called The Alarm, which I was a big fan of as well. He did the string arrangements for Paul McCartney and Wings, Band on the Run. So he's like just so much credibility with Tony Visconti. And the thing was, he was a New Yorker but was living in London. So talk about way before remote recording. We had to fly, or we got to fly to London to record our first album, and that was a very cool experience. And in a way, I'm kind of happy that I was able to do that in 1988, 89, because today you might not be able to do that because
right?
because of budgets or whatever. They say, "Oh yeah, well, do your tracks, and we'll have Tony in his studio in London, but you just record your tracks here, and we'll make it work." But you're gonna have, no, we were all there. We lived um, together in the same. Oddly enough, we were staying at the Virgin recording studios. They had like sort of apartments by Shepherd's Bush, and
Wow.
we were staying and living in those apartments at Virgin Recording Studios. But we would take the tube into Soho every single morning, and which was right down the Good Earth Studios was right down by Chinatown and in Soho, London. So we get there, record, have a little break. Tony would, like, whenever we would do a break, Tony Visconti would take us outside the studio and walk us around Soho and tell us stories
Wow.
about like all the cool things that they had, experiences that he would have had with, like, whether it was with one of the Beatles, or whether it was with, one of Bowie, or T-Rex himself. It's like all these cool stories. It was like getting an education in rock and roll and getting your first album recorded by him as well.
To have your first album recorded by him, that must have been really exciting. You like to see,
Yeah.
that name that was involved in probably so many influential bands and artists for you. What was that like? You kind of, did you ever think like, oh gosh, like we've peaked now? Like, who's gonna produce the next one?
No, I think we got really lucky, and personally, I've been lucky to work with some of the best producers, best names, in the business, to be able to go from Tony Visconti to with working with Jack Douglas, who produced the Slash's Snakepit album, um, and then Bob Rock, who produced the Tal Bachman album. But in between there are guys that might not be as known, but Jim Mitchell, engineer slash producer for Slash's project, he was just as instrumental to the whole success. Well, that album didn't have a lot of success, but I look at that album as being successful.
Of
Ain't
course.
Life Grand, because even though the commercial success wasn't there, the musical sort of integrity of rock and roll was upheld, and I still to this day think that that's some of Slash's best guitar playing post GNR Appetite uh, that ever went down was on that album. So if you haven't checked out Ain't Life Grand, like I said, it's a celebration of Slash's guitar playing, and I think of a whole entire band writing songs together. But yeah, I've been very lucky to work with some great producers, and like that are household names, but also a lot of producers that are on their way up and working. And you know, the guy that just produced my last solo album, Christopher Foley. You worked with him, you played with him, you
Hmm.
know how what a great producer he
He's
is.
incredible.
You in your own right, you're on your way up to do it. So I've really been blessed to work with some talented people all over the years.
I think you segued beautifully into that Slash's Snake Pit album. So tell us again the recording studio that was done at.
Well, the album was recorded three different times.
Okay.
Once as demos, because we would record every single day, and we would record on those things called ADATs. It was that sort of that switch between reel to reel to completely digital. There was these ADATs, and I think who else had there was two different types, but we were on those machines, and it was digital tape. It was like recording on a VHS tape.
Hmm.
Um, and we demoed those all up. Those mixes sounded great. Jim Mitchell was very involved in that production, and because he was there every day with us, from the beginning to the end of a song, the whole process. And then we decided to record the entire album. Okay, now we've got the demos. Let's do the entire album at Snake Pit, which was all on the bottom half of Slash's house. It was in the basement of Slash's Hollywood house at the time. And so um, we did that and took it seriously. And I mean, it was a crazy time, tumultuous drama, all the things that you would, sort of think of going into a making of a rock and roll album was happening there. Rod Jackson, his voice, was on fire, uh, singing his ass off every single day. So much music on that album, Ain't Life Grand. So we had done it demos, recorded, then again at studio, and then the record label said, you know what? We would like Jack Douglas to come in, and we had other producers that had actually come. Rick Rubin came by at one point.
Wow.
Um, Mike Campbell from Tom Petty's band came by as well. But the right fit, I think, was Jack Douglas, who's always been a huge hero of mine because he did produce the first two Cheap Trick records, and or he produced the first Cheap Trick record and then recorded the tracks for In Color, which Tom Weirman basically took and made it a great record as well. But I mean, there's a little bit more of the raw nerves and a little bit more of the indie punk vibe of Cheap Trick is all about Jack Douglas. So we recorded the Slash the Snake Pit record a third time. Uh, and that one led us to all different places. We went to Sunset Sound uh,
Wow.
for for uh, for the drums. One of the big rooms. I remember at the time, I think the studio right next to ours, it was either Jellyfish was recording. It's definitely It's definitely on the Spilt Milk. If you open up the gateway, the Spilt Milk. That's the room that we were recording in.
Wow.
So
Okay.
so either Jellyfish was there at once, or it was No Doubt. And I know two totally different bands, but memory serves, or maybe they crossed over because we were in the back room over there at Sunset Sound. But then we did Layering. New York was there. Slash and Rod went to New York for a while to do the guitar overdubs. The album just took a long time at that point um, to get put out. But that was the third time, and that was with Jack Douglas behind the controls and Jim Mitchell right next to him. So, at the end of the day, that was the album that we put out, and very happy with it. Still very proud of it, and I can tell you, there's still some tracks lying around on those ADATs that probably didn't make the final album that I wish Slash would find someday and put them out because very proud of that music.
And I feel like I think Jim Mitchell was influential in a couple of other ways for you as well, because I believe he also produced the DPM album or had
Yes, he did.
a huge
He,
hand
he,
in that.
he oh, a huge hand. He mixed the entire thing, but he
Okay.
uh, he helped out with the production, engineering when we were laying down the tracks. Mark Schulman also produced it as well, and because we were a trio, we kind of had our own say in it as well. Um, Rick Canny was involved as far as management. So with Dad's Porno Mag, and that was my first real solo album that I put out um, during after Gilby Clarke or right around this. I might have still been playing with Gilby Clarke at that time, but DPM just cool heavy pop trio, and I think it might have been a little bit ahead of its time. It's
I
like
think so.
right after a lot of a lot of cool bands and a lot of cool kind of power pop, but heavy power pop bands broke out after that. And yeah, I love that album. We had the smash hit single "Smell My Finger," which to this day is like, I love the production of it,
Yeah.
and I love. In fact, that track we recorded right near the Coconut Teaser at a studio, and darn it, the co-producer's name is escaping me right now, but Jim Mitchell was also involved in that. Mark Schulman was there, and there was one more producer. But it was such a we knew when we were laying down those tracks that like this song could be something. We really
Mm-hmm.
like it. So
Mm-hmm.
so it's and I believe in Dad's Porno Mag. Gilby Clarke even had his hand on Pigeons Are Rude and maybe a couple of the other songs that
Mm-hmm.
we had done as well. So he was Gilby and I have always had a really cool working relationship. I played guitar for him for many years. We first started out in a band called Candy. That Candy became Electric Angels, which we talked about, and he had a band called Kill for Thrills. Then from Kill for Thrills, he went to Guns N' Roses. Then I joined him after when his solo album came out, and that's when he started helping me do production as well. So a lot of these things overlap each other, but that's just the nature of living in Los Angeles in in that era.
And I remember you always saying like your and I'm paraphrasing, but your current gig or
Yeah,
your current situation is
leads you
always
to your next.
takes you to your next. Do you and I'm just wondering, did working with Jim Mitchell on that DPM album, was there any help from him getting the Slash's Snake Pit thing, or was there any sort of
I mean, it never hurts. I mean,
mm-hmm,
anytime that you have a good working relationship with somebody and have already been involved with someone like a band like Guns N' Roses, I'm sure their influence, and a word here, a kind word there, helps the whole process. Slash actually came about because we just really vibed well on stage when he would come up and guest on Alice Cooper shows, because he'd be around a lot of times. Like, we'd be in like Detroit or something, and maybe Slash would be there doing a show as well, or he'd be just hanging. He would come and come up on stage and like gravitate to my side of the stage, because we had Reb Beach on the other side of the stage, who was taking over with a lot of the shredding. And I think that, just me being a little bit more of the rock and roll, laying down the chords, he kind of gravitated towards that so he could do his soloing thing. And then we just played well off each other. And then he started, uh, emailing me and saying, "Hey, man, maybe we should put some ideas down and see what happens." And so
Mm,
that's what we ended up doing with that. And to be honest with you, I'm sure there was hopefully some nice words said from Jim and Bobby from Mates. We would Mates Rehearsal Studio was another big place where a lot of bands met up. A lot of the similar type of rock and roll bands would rehearse, and it was more of a hang. So when someone needed someone else, or there was some opportunity that was opening up, you know, Bobby was really good at, hey, why don't you get this guy over here, this
right.
guy over there, and so that's the way it kind of worked. There was a lot of, it wasn't so much social, like social media networking. It was good old fashioned networking,
Word
like
of
going
mouth.
up to the person
Yeah.
and just hanging with them.
Yeah.
The hang was very important, and I would say the hang, and I've said this many times, the hang sometimes is more important than your level of actual talent, because you're gonna
Hmm.
at a certain level you have to be, you know, you have to be talented. You can't go below that bar. You have to have
Hmm.
something that whatever it's the X factor or whatever, but you have to have a certain proficiency of your instrument. But then after that, all the pluses and to get you the gig, that's the hang. That's the attitude that you have. That's being on time, you know?
Right. You touched on the Tal Bachman thing. I just want to come back there a little bit and ask you about that intro guitar part for the song She's So High. In
Yeah.
my head, I've made up this little idea of how it went down in my head, and for some reason I see you recording this in the live room, and everyone's eyes are on you getting this part down, and because it's such an intimate and focused part of the song.
Yeah.
Can
Well,
you tell us what was it like that, or can you tell us a story about
it wa-
how that
it
was
was a
being
it was
tracked?
a very stressful guitar part to lay down for that track, but it was written way back in a rehearsal studio when the song first came in.
Okay.
And it was actually written very, very nonchalantly. I was like, I heard the song, and I heard the chords over the rhythm, over the verse, and I just kept thinking in my head that "Here Comes the Sun" kept going through my head, and I was like, George Harrison, and what would George Harrison play over sort of a Paul McCartney chord change, or maybe a John Lennon chord change. And I'm big fan of three note triads. Triads are kind of are the most underrated of like hookiness,
It's where the chord
to
tones
get.
are. It's where everything is, you know? Yeah.
Well, at that time I was really experimenting with different triads, and this just happened to work. And it luckily it made its way. It went through the lineup changes, because when I first started with Tal Bachman, it was a certain lineup change, and I talk about one gig leading to the other. Mark Schulman, who had produced Dad's Porno Mag, he was the original drummer in Tal Bachman. So he was the one
Okay.
that got he and to be 100% honest, the only reason I tried out for Tal Bachman was because told uh, I told Mark, I said, Mark, if I try out for this band, will you just finish producing Dad's Porno Mag and we'll finish this album? And he goes, of course, we're gonna finish, but I just gotta find a band for Tal. You know, I gotta make sure this happens. I go, look, I'm gonna try out. I'm gonna get the gig. I was, that's pretty, maybe a little pompous or whatever. But I was like, I'm gonna get the gig, but then after that, you're gonna finish the album, right? And he's like, yeah, I will. And so I did. I did get the gig, and and then but then obviously I did hear the genius of the songs, because when Tal first came into Los Angeles, he was sleeping on Mark Schulman's couch, and he just had a bunch of great songs, and I was like, okay, well, let's do them. A great song is a great song, no doubt. That's But you have to add on to that, and you need a bunch of different parts to go with it. You need good musicianship, good supportive parts,
Hmm.
and hopefully maybe even supportive personalities if you're going to make it a band. And at first, Tal really did want that whole band vibe. He was looking for a band vibe. He knew it was going to be his own solo name, but when like he always wanted it to be more of a band sort of vibe. Um, but it didn't end up turning out that way, and that's why eventually, when the opportunity for me to go back out on the road with Alice Cooper came about, I saw that as much more of a band type of vibe. So, look, no, no hard feelings. Tal and I have spoke over the years, and we're fine. We're all good. Um, I think at the time, not having your name put on the album, even though you played on 9 of the 11 tracks and did most of the soloing, blah blah blah, guitar parts and all that stuff. I love the experience of working with Bob Rock and making that album, and to not get credit for it when the album actually came out,
Mm.
a little bit, it's feeling a little slighted,
Yeah, of
for a little
course.
while. But now it's kind of like water in the bridge. For the people that know, they know. And every time that so you hear "She's So High," or I hear "She's So High," whether it's in an elevator or on some sort of '90s playlist, I have a smile on my face, because those are my guitar parts. That's my guitar solo. I remember being in that room, like you said, when that guitar part was actually recorded for good, sitting there with a Rickenbacker 12 string, and Bob Rock just like dissecting every single note. Like, he was
Wow.
really good at doing that. He was really, he was hard on you, but he knew what he wanted, and he wanted greatness at the very end. You could have played it great 5 times before already, but he wanted you to play it 10 times so he could have 10 choices to choose from and then get the exact one.
Wow.
So I look, is that the way is that my approach to recording? No, I'm not that type of producer. So I'm not that type of recording artist. I like it. If the vibe feels right, it's good, great. We can fix it. If it's a little bit off, that's going to be okay. Uh, but Bob really wanted that perfection of that part, which was important to have, because to this day, when you hear it, when people cover that song, they don't ever deviate from that line, because that
Mm.
line is a hooky little piece.
I once had a very, very quick recording session in a Los Angeles recording studio called the Hobby Shop. And while I was there, um, the producer for these 3 or 4 songs, a guy called Scott Gilman, he said, "Oh, this is just half the studio. There's another studio next door." And I said, "Oh, okay. Um, can I go and check it out? Can I go and have a look?" And I went to the other side, and I saw a plaque for the Eyes of Alice Cooper. And I was like, huh, okay, this is interesting. Obviously, I'm a big Alice Cooper fan as well. And I said, "Is this where this album was done?" And he said, "Yeah, that's Mud Rock Studio."
Yes.
And you had a big hand in the songwriting on that album, working
Yeah,
with.
I mean, we all sat down and regrouped, as a unit. I mean, I remember writing a lot of the songs with Eric Dover and um, Chuck and Alice, all right there in the same room. Eric Singer was there as well, but for the most part, at Eric Dover's house, and Alice sitting there, myself. It was one of those times where we saw the opportunity. Like Eric and I, we were had a lot of our own songs. Eric Dover, one of the world's best kept secrets, great vocalist, great guitar player, great songwriter. Um, he has a lot of solo songs that he sort of donated for the Alice album, Eyes of Alice Cooper, and as I did the same. There's a song on that album called "Between High School and Old School." It was one of the later songs that we recorded, one of the last songs I submitted, because I was saving it for my own. I was saving it for my own project, and it was like da 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 da, and it kind of just moved like this, back and forth, and I was like, I want this riff for my own. But then I'm like, you know what? If Alice puts his voice on it, it's going to immediately become an Alice Cooper song, which is very cool because it'll be, you know, one of my favorite contributions that I've given him for for a song. So that's exactly what we did. I just said, look, here's one of my riffs. Would you like it? He goes, yeah. And then between high school and old school was the title, and then he was the one that crafted all these the whole story behind it, which he does with a lot of things, a lot of songs that we collaborate on. Like you just give him a song title and he'll come up with the story behind it.
That's awesome. And was that recorded at that studio? Or was it mixed at that studio? Do you remember?
I believe you would be thinking that it was probably mixed there, because what we recorded
Okay.
that studio across the parking lot of Mate's rehearsal. That was in the valley.
Okay.
This is and that studio was Mike Klink's studio, who Mike Klink produced Appetite for Destruction. So he had a studio, and I don't know if it's still basically there, but it was in the parking lot of Mate's rehearsal. So this studio, Mudrock just happened to be in the waiting room of Mates while we were doing pre-production and rehearsals of the new songs. Mudrock walks in. He goes, "This sounds really good," and I and Alice meets him and says hello to him. He goes, "Well, we're looking for a producer. We just we just lost our producer for this album. We're looking." He goes, "I'm a producer." Mudrock says, because I love this stuff. I think we can make something happen right now. He goes, "Well, where would we record it?" "Well, right across the way." We were like in Studio B. We literally walked 150 feet, you know, like to the across the parking lot, and like started recording the next day.
Wow.
The drum techs and the guitar techs just rolled the amps into, one garage, which is Studio B, into a slightly nicer sounding garage, which was those studios there. So, yeah, that was a ultimate garage rock band, garage, you know, just garage rock. It was cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. Um,
We used I mean, I've said this before, but Alice would bring in a copy of Love It to Death and goes, this is the vibe we're going to. Black and white, just kind of like straight ahead rock and roll. I don't want crazy, crazy overdubs. It's fine to do some overdubs, but I want us to be raw, garage. This album, Love It to Death. And if you look at the album Love It to Death, it's got a black and white album cover, Eyes of Alice Cooper, black and white album cover.
okay. Yeah, wow. That's so cool. I'd never heard that story before that Mudrock just walked in there and I'm a producer. Hey, I should try that. I should go to some rehearsal
Eh,
studios and just
Start
I can
hanging
do
out.
it.
Just start hanging out outside instead of, like, what's this guy doing? Well, he's either a producer or he's homeless. I'm not sure.
Um, you played guitars on the Brutal Planet and Dragontown albums of Alice Cooper and produced by Bob Marlette. Lots of
Yep.
Bobs in the producer world, isn't there? Like you got Bob
Bob
Ezrin, Bob
Rock,
Rock,
Bob Ezrin,
Bob
Bob
Marlette,
Marlette. Yeah.
Bob
Bobby
Claremont.
from Mates.
Yeah,
Bobby
I
Dahl, the bass player of Poison. Never forget him. Um,
I think I'm gonna change my name to Bob Miller, and maybe I'll just be that. That's all you need is to become that number one producer.
you're so close. You're so close already. Robbie, Robert, Bob. It's
Yeah,
there.
it's
The
there.
transition is made. I
Um,
think I
yeah.
think it's Mutt Bob Lang. I think that's actually his middle name.
Oh,
Mutt.
really?
I don't
Maybe it is.
know.
But for those albums, I mean, they were pretty. They were heavy albums, industrial, heavy
Yeah.
metal rock albums, which was my kind of first introduction to you on that Brutal Planet tour. But that's not really you. You're a power pop rock guy. You're quite, so when you were recording some of those guitars, was that interesting to be in such drop tunings? Do you remember
Well,
any stories from that recording session?
I remember driving way out on the 101 past the 405. Like back in those days, it was like, leaving the cocoon of Hollywood was, or even the valley, short valley was like, a big deal to go way out there past Calabasas and stuff. But that's where Bob was recording it. And again, one of the earlier guys to make those home studios pay off with albums, because it wasn't so much about having the big rooms at that point. It was just getting the sounds, and Bob Marlette was great at getting those tones, and working with those tunings. If you check out that album, uh, Brutal Planet, all you really need to do to play almost every song on that album is just get a guitar when drop D tuning. All right. If it's not drop
Okay.
D tuning, then you're a half step down with drop D. And, it's the next album that he produced as well, called Dragon Town. That's when we even went down to low C and stuff. But for me, I knew it was part of Alice's role, that was an era of Alice Cooper that he was living.
Hmm.
And Alice, um, Alice's late assistant, Brian Nelson, I love him and near dear guy. We was very cool, um, part of the Alice Cooper legacy. But Brian Nelson, uh, his assistant, told me something a long time ago. Because if you notice, Ryan, because Alice likes to make albums in twos. Love It to Death and
Was
the
it
one with the
Killer?
snake,
Yeah.
Killer.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. So, um, Brutal Planet, Dragon Town, Eyes of Alice Cooper, uh, Dirty Diamonds. So there's a lot of pairs. And so I was aware during uh, during the Brutal Planet era that we were going to make these two albums, and they were going to be heavy. So it was almost like playing a role, the way Alice likes to play a role. It was me playing a role of a heavier guitar player,
Hmm.
and a heavier with low tuning. And you know what? I still put in all my pop licks. They just sound heavier when you're tuned down a whole step. I mean,
Hmm.
that's what Dad's Porno Mag is. Some of the stuff, like the song in Dad's Porno Mag, to go back to that, is a very heavy, Pigeons Are Rude is a very heavy song. But that's because we're tuned to drop D standard. So it's a
Hmm.
pop song. If you just played it in regular E, it's a much more lighter sounding song. But then when you start doing it, when you start playing it in D standard, it takes everything down. So a lot of it's a little bit about the attitude that you take when you're playing those parts as well.
Yeah, for sure. Amazing. Um, I want to take us to Roxy 77, and you released an EP called The Ameriswede.
Yes.
And you did two different mixes for this. Now, I don't know, I haven't really seen this before, but you did a Swedish mix and you did an American mix, hence the
Exactly.
title. Um, what made you do that? And of course, shout outs to both mixers on this. One, we know even from the Alice Cooper band, Tommy Henriksen.
Yeah.
And I believe the other mixer was John Borden.
Yes, from Sweden.
from
Yeah, he's
Sweden.
more of an indie producer, indie Swedish indie music producer. Great, you know, um, both mixes I appreciate, and that's why I put them both out. The whole idea for putting out two different styles of mixes was because I wanted to do something that was the album that came before the Amerisweet EP, which was called Two Sides to Every Story, which was Roxy 77 as well, where I did the entire album electric and the versions that we ended up that you go onto Spotify and listen to, and then the same exact album but acoustic versions of those same songs, but different arrangements, maybe a different style, but all done acoustically. So
Hmm.
we had that sort of uh, dichotomy, and then what could we do with the next one? And that was, oh, let's take it to a production level, you know, and then that just ended up working out because you'd be surprised at how many people really did favor one production mix over another. Same tracks, but
Right.
just mixed differently. That's the cool thing about it. It's like it wasn't like different sessions. These were the same recording sessions. It just shows you the power of how much a song can change within the mix.
Yeah, it's just such a cool concept, and
Well, I
I mean,
appreciate that.
I don't know if I've seen anyone else do that. Yeah,
No,
that's really
they
cool.
haven't had. They maybe they didn't have to fill up a whole other side of the album,
Right,
vinyl
the
album.
other side of the LP. It's genius. Um, that's so cool. And talking about Tommy Henriksen, you know, I want to just hear a little bit more about how your Imagine Your Reality album, a lot of those vocals were recorded, I think, with a good old SM7B, you know,
Hotel room.
in the closet of a hotel room.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, sometimes in the closet, sometimes in the bathroom, sometimes, you know, we recorded guitars on the days off. We recorded vocals, you know, when we had time. And it sometimes we would be in hotel rooms for sure. But I love the way that, you know, then we took those demo all those demos of those three or four songs that we had that put on the album that Glenn played drums on. We went into a studio and Glenn played real drums over them, over the, you know, he played along with the click and
Hmm.
the drum machine that was already on the demo version.
Hmm.
So it's kind of a backwards way of doing it because a lot of times you want to do your basic tracks first, but we did basic tracks at the end of the process. But you know what? There's a lot of people that do that, and you know, there's a million different ways to not be able to afford to record, right? But there's a million ways to sort of to put the pie together. As long as at the end of the day, you know, you're happy with the pie.
Right, exactly. And big shout out to Christopher Foley as well for who did a lot of work on that album. And
Yeah,
you know,
we
is
talked about him earlier.
we talked about him earlier, but we talked about him the other day and just how the, he's just got this incredible sheen to all the songs on that album. I mean, they
Yeah.
have they're so well produced. There's such incredible production on it. Um,
Well, I appreciate that.
yeah.
I think to work with him was a pleasure because we didn't have a lot of time in the studio. We were doing it kind of like on within gaps
Hmm.
of like we didn't like block out, you know, 3 weeks at his studio. We would go in on the days where there wasn't a session being recorded already, wasn't already booked out. So we would when we came into the studio and it was down, you know, right in downtown Stockholm, we knew what we had to do. We had okay, we had a plan. We have guitar overdubs, 1, 2, 3. Then you take a quick break, and then you got some vocals that you have to lay down, at least one or two vocals, you know, and then we take a break until the next day or the next time we have a couple days break, and then we would take another chunk. So he's really good. I guess that's another great thing about being a great producer is time, learning how to manage your time and make the most out of your artist with the time that you have.
Hmm.
Because sometimes, you know, a singer only has one or two really good takes in him before before that edge is gone, and then it's like, okay, well, I got those two takes. We can get another two the next session, but now let's bring in the guitar player. Or if this singer happens to play guitar, in my case, it would be me. He's like, okay, well, Ryan, your voice is, you. It's not that it's shot, but it's not giving me the same energy as what I need to finish the track. Let's move on to guitar instead.
Right.
And he was really brilliant with like managing that. And I guess that's one thing that if I could borrow uh, from him or any a great producer, it would be like how to get the most out of your artist. It's like being a head coach of a football team. It's like being, you know, a,
Right.
just knowing how to get the best out of people.
How to
That's what
use
a
that
producer should
time.
be,
Yeah, how to use the time
and use that
wisely.
time.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Amazing. Um, can you tell us, because it was a recent album, came out last year. Can you give us a little bit of an insight on how that the new Alice Cooper album Road, how
Wrote.
those tracks came together?
This album was actually really done as a cohesive unit. Everybody came into Nashville. The songwriting selection of choosing which songs we were going to do, well, it was very diplomatic because everybody was going to stick in two songs.
Right.
And then Bob Ezrin had some writers like Tom Morello come in and he had a song that he wanted from Tom Morello, and then you know there was a few other writers that would bring in a song, but each of us in the band had made sort of I got a very diplomatic sort of thing, like, hey, everybody brings in a couple songs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Glenn even has a drum solo on the album, which is great. At
Right.
the end of Magic Bus, I mean, if you get that far in the album, which I hope you do, you'll hear a whole drum solo, which I'm glad he was able to write and put on tape. Now, we all got flown into Nashville, all in a studio, and everybody was set up in the actual studio in the big room. We all had a little guitar world, bass world, drum world. So when we were recording those final drums, we were all in the same room. Even Alice
Amazing. Wow.
singing vocals. So it was only when if there was when we left the studio, if there was an overdub that had to happen, like, hey man, just redo your one, part in this bridge here, then we could maybe fly that in because we couldn't stay there forever because this act honestly happened well after well into the mixing process. If there was something that needed, only if it needed to happen. If they
Mm-hmm.
couldn't fix it, it was like, but there's a lot of there's I'm not saying there's a lot of mistakes on that album because because they've been produced and everything's been smoothed out to a point where if you listen super hard, yeah, there's going to be mistakes. There's mistakes on our live show, but that's sort of the beauty of us being three guitar players. We're always covering for one another.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody messes, if I drop a note, I know that Nita and Tommy are going to be right up there to back it up, and you're not going to really hear it in the mix. I can hear a few things all over the album, but when you listen to it, it almost adds to the vibe and the liveness of it. So, yeah, that album Alice was very adamant about it being a a representation, a really live representation of what this live band was, because that's the reason why I wanted to put, this touring band on his album, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
happy that he did that.
Yeah.
Happy he made that decision.
Amazing.
Uh,
What is your favorite album because of the songs, but not necessarily because of the production? Because I
ooh,
always say, when it comes down to it, even if a song is a great song, regardless of how well or how badly it was recorded.
it's produced, yeah. I mean, I can tell you that Cheap Trick at Budokan it's not the greatest produced record. It's a live album. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
in all intents and purposes. I mean, it's not. There's a lot of stuff that was actually, you know recorded at Budokan. I'm sure there was some overdubs as well, just like every live album. A lot of people say Frampton Comes Alive is not really alive. It's as Frampton comes in the studio, but no, he comes. But Budokan for me, Cheap Trick at Budokan, is just chock full of hits.
Yeah.
Song after song after song after song is just great, and it doesn't matter so much about the production.
Right. 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 Right.
So so I would give that one of my favorite. You know, that, not the most perfectly produced album, because how can you produce a live album perfectly? You
Right.
know.
Right. 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 But the songs were just so good. Yeah.
Yep.
And what about an album that you love because you love the songs, but because you love the production? Because I know you've been getting more and more into certain styles lately, and you've been sending me stuff saying like, check out the production on this album, or you've really
Yeah.
been. I feel like you've been listening to maybe music slightly differently lately. And so, is there a
Well,
certain
I
sound that
like
you're hearing?
vibes. I
Right.
like vibes, and and sometimes I think a production vibe is underrated, and I wish it would be. Uh, I wish it would be. Well, I don't actually wish it would be bigger, because it's up for us to sort of recreate that vibe and maybe push it out and be original with it as well. But one of the albums that I think I love the production of it, and I think it's underrated, is the Happy Mondays Pills, Thrills, and Bellyaches. That album, as far as the acoustic layering, the drums, the way the percussion and drums just lay down a very dance but still rock and roll vibe, and the way that they were able to produce Sean Ryder, who's not Pavarotti, and you wouldn't want him to be, but he's not the greatest singer in the world. He'll probably be the first person to admit it, but he kills it on that album. And for some reason, that is one of my most underrated, well-produced albums that's out there. I mean, there's a
Amazing.
ton of. I like that. I like bands like the Hives or the Vines, just for their rawness, you know,
Hmm.
and it makes it kind of that guitar. Just something about a guitar that's just in your face. If it's recorded correctly and hits all the right tones, it's
Hmm.
amazing production.
Yeah.
Um, any of the Def Leppard album, uh, High and Dry, before the production, before the crazy production. I'm talking about
Right.
High and Dry, like like a young AC/DC. Just I love that. That was great. I'm sure there's a lot of well-produced albums that I'm missing that are, when I think about it, will go back. But it's more for me always about a vibe,
Right.
and sometimes it could be something, how a producer captures an artist, um, when a certain vocal performance. There's a band, and you would never think that maybe someone like me would be into this band, but there's a band from South Africa called Deontwood. It's more of a rap techno band. But you listen to the vocal performances and the drums and the way they were able to produce these songs and capture the emotion of this guy and this girl, that are just total performance, total uh, killing it.
Yeah.
To me, when I first heard Deontwood, I thought that, okay, this is the future of what rock and roll. If rock and roll is not going to have a ton of guitars in it, this is what the evolution is going to be.
Right.
But
Right. Right.
thank God we're still bringing back guitars, and we're still, you know,
I
Road
know,
Warrior.
Ryan, thank you so much for talking to me today about, I mean, we talk quite often anyways, several times a week,
Oh,
but it's been nice to nerd out with you a little bit. Here's maybe some recording studio stories you haven't shared before. Some little bits and bobs there, but super appreciate it, man. And yeah, thank you so much
always.
for coming on.
Well, as we continue this production journey and new music journey for my new stuff coming out in 2025. I mean, let's continue to have these conversations, and hopefully, the audience grows and follows with the music and follows with your recording and mixing career and what's going on with it, and hopefully they come out and see us at a show at one point when we can actually get this out and playing in front of people.
Hopefully. All right, man. Well, let's catch up soon.
All right, see ya.
Cheers.
Bye,
Bye.
Robby.